Okay, now we can go. Okay, good evening, everybody. Vince, just give me a minute, buddy. I just want to say to everybody again, welcome. I'm looking forward to Tom and Meg's presentation tonight. They always do excellent presentations. Um, However, just again, the elephant in the room, the officers, we do need officers for the club. We need a president, a vice president, a secretary, a financial secretary, and I think we probably could use one or two more board members. So if anybody's interested, and again, you don't need experience, just the willingness to want to help and get involved and have fun with the club and do some programming. If you ever wondered why people didn't do what you would like to see done, well, this is your chance to get on the board and maybe offer the direction that we need. So I'm going to let somebody in here. So that's my 2 cents for tonight. So Vince, it's yours now.
Evening. We have a very significant donation that we got from John Walburn. John's mom and dad years ago had been very active on the board at the club. They've since deceased quite a long time ago. And actually, I looked up their obits just to try to figure who they were out because I knew they were part of the club. And their obits actually mentioned their activity with our club. But anyway, the son, John, who is older than I am, donated almost half a room of our room here filled with gear. We now have it more compact, thanks to Kim and Bob. But we have a ton of gear, older digital lenses, older digital cameras, backdrops, professional lighting equipment, and flashes. There's a ton of stuff that you're going to see listed. Look for it in the newsletter. The board meets next week, and we'll try to figure out how we can make the equipment available to the members who want it with some type of donation to the club. That's what we have to work out. And the equipment that doesn't go through the club, we will try to sell to help fund the club to maybe some artists here in the building or elsewhere. So there's that news. The 2026 outside speaker calendar is filled through June. And I'm waiting on confirmation for the last 3 talks of 2026. And the speaker list, when you see it in the newsletter, Jenny had just the names listed, but in the near future, you'll see the entire list with the descriptions of the programs. They're phenomenal. So it's getting time to renew, keep the next year's programs in mind, and make sure you're all renewed to hear our speakers. And Jenny, or Becky has to.
Oh, Becky, yeah.
Yeah. One more announcement.
All right. I just wanted to remind people that I have an art opening on Saturday in Pottstown at Anno Artem, and would love to see faces and people. So if you can come, you can email if you need info, but annoartem.com has all the info about the show and their hours, and it'll be up for 3 weekends. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays.
I just want to mention one thing. We had a really nice Halloween shoot again. Thank you, Kim, Rick, and everybody who put all that effort in. I think Kim spent how many days here setting it up? We had some really nice models. It was a lot of fun. So look for that every year. She does this every year. And what's next year? Shrek. This year was Addams Family. Last year was Beetlejuice. The year before that was Medusa. So next year is going to be Shrek. So we had a lot of fun here, and that's what we want to do more of, is use this space. So if you have ideas, you have wants or needs or whatever, pass it by the people on the board, pass it through the community, put it on Facebook, get it to us somehow. And we need to put those things on the calendar because we're paying for the space. We're not using it enough. And that's really an important part of the community, is the social part of it. But we learned a lot about lighting last Saturday too. So it was a lot of fun. Right?
Yes, and one of the best things we do is we have members who are knowledgeable and travelers who come and share their wonderful photos and stories with us. Like tonight, we have Meg and Tom Stoeri. Meg is a retired teacher, 6th grade, middle school, and Tom is a retired engineer. And they're retired from those jobs, but they're not retired from photography. So you are going to really enjoy these longtime BPS members sharing with us their photographs from the North Atlantic, the trip to Scotland and Iceland. Yes. We are just so grateful that they're here and sharing with us tonight. So welcome to Tom and Meg. And we're going to turn the lights. We'll turn the lights off. I know that they will be a little bit dark, but we need to be able to see the screen up here. You may need to clip that on. Yeah, I don't.
Can I put this in my pocket? Can you hear me? Okay. I did, yes, I turned it around.
All right. You're on.
Okay. So good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Wanted to spend some time with you taking. Yep. We got, so I'll continue. There we go. We recently took midsummer, we took a trip up through the North Atlantic, going from the northern tip of Scotland up through a series of islands, the Orkney, Fair Isle, the Faroes, and then on to Iceland, and circumnavigated Iceland. So we want to take you through that trip. It was a lot of fun. It's an adventure. And I learned on that trip an interesting little quote that says, so what's adventure? Well, adventure is discomfort recalled at leisure. That's what adventure is. So keeping that in mind, what I'm going to cover tonight is a little bit of an overview, so you know where we went, how we prepared. We'll talk about the major stops we had on the trip, and then some observations and a final word. So this, if you're not familiar with the North Atlantic, over there in the lower left, you can see the area that's covered in the bigger picture here. We spent 20 days going from Aberdeen, Scotland, up to the lower part of Iceland and then around Iceland. We went with a great company we've gone with several times before, Adventure Canada. It's a small ship, 140 passengers and about an equal number of crew, including the expedition team. That's about as big as we get. We're used to chartering our own boats, and Meg kind of gets a little tense when she gets on board with more than 20 or 30 people, but it was a lot of fun. So the numbers next to the points on the chart are the days that we went. So we started in day 1 in Aberdeen and so on, and that's the way we're going to follow. You might notice where the Arctic Circle is at the top, that's about as far as we went north. So just to give you an idea. Oops. Switch over. Good. So a little bit about how we prepare. It's important, we feel, when we're going on these trips, particularly anything from 7 to more days, that you get a good idea of where you're going and what you're going to encounter. So particularly when you're trying to do photography. So it's moderately active physically. There are daily trips ashore for hiking and exploring. Zodiacs, these small rubber boats with outboards on the back, taking about 10 people at a time. That's typically how you're moving, inshore, offshore, around, sightseeing, and so on. And the other thing is, the major rule, at least for me, and I know for Meg and I, is first rule of photography is you have to be there. And when you consider that, and you consider that I used to be a Nikon shooter and I used to carry around 40 pounds of equipment, and I stopped that about 10 years ago. And we now shoot 4/3 cameras and Olympus, which we really enjoy. And that greatly reduces the load of what we're taking. What's the weather? What's the environment like? Well, it's going to be wet, windy, and cool, not cold. So you expect to get very wet, and you need to outfit yourself for that. And we're moving a lot, and there's no place to set up and use a tripod or anything like that. So that gave you an idea of how to prepare for the trip. Looking at what the quarters will be on the ship, the cabins are nice. They're not luxurious, but there is room to put the laptop down, get a power strip out, and be able to recharge batteries and back things up and so on, and do a little bit of culling on board if you wanted to, of your pictures. We took back about 7,000 pictures. Okay, of those, probably kept about 700 of those, maybe a couple hundred is what we really worked with. And I'd love to be able to show you them all, but it's only a sampling tonight. The other thing is we're in remote villages and small towns. So if you forgot something, you're not going to be able to run out to the corner store and get it or anything like that. You need to prepare, make your lists, bring the things you need, including drugs and over-the-counter drugs and anything you think you might need, because it's awful hard to get it out there. And the last thing was when we looked at the luggage constraints, okay, you got to pack all this into one to carry on and one 22 kilogram, 22 kilogram, I think it was anyway. You had to consider that in terms of getting it all there. So that was part of the preparation. Okay. What's the setting? Well, we went to Orkney, and then, well, from Aberdeen to Orkney to Fair Isle and so on. These are all stepping stones going from Scotland all the way up to Iceland. They have a great heritage of the Norse heritage, the North heritage off Norway and Denmark and so on. These are stepping stones, islands to work their way up to Iceland and beyond, and eventually over to Greenland and so on. They have a shared natural environment. You can certainly tell as you go from Iceland through the Faroes to Orkney and Fair Isle that the volcanic activity is very recent in Iceland, and it gets older and older as you go down. So the rocks are sharp and the cliffs are sharp in Iceland, and then they're still pretty sharp in the Faroes. They get molded off a bit in the Orkney and the Fair Isles, but it's all similar stuff. Rugged cliffs, very few trees, very windy, and wet. It's a great birding area. Has great, very rich bird life, and I think I've hit most of it. The interesting thing is the Orkney and Shetland were under Norwegian rule up into the 15th century. Iceland and the Faroes were Norwegian also, but later are now Danish. Okay, and Iceland is actually independent now. So what we took, clothing, you got to make sure you're waterproof. That's for sure. Now you're going to see a lot of these blue shells that you show Meg wearing here. Those were provided by the expedition company. Very good shells. They're not for warmth, but they're for weatherproofing. You have to bring waterproof pants. Make sure you have your rain pants on. We have mostly used hiking shoes, but there at times getting in and out of the Zodiacs, we would have what they call wet landings, where you actually had to wade ashore a little bit. And in that case, rubber boots were provided on the ship, and you had a locker on the ship you could put your stuff in. Also carrying a light backpack. That's where we put the hiking boots and anything else as we came ashore, and then changed off our boots and so on at that point. In terms of camera equipment, we took 2 mirrorless bodies, Olympus cameras. We had 4 lenses as shown there, a fixed 300 and several zooms and a teleconverter. Double those lengths for a full frame camera gives you an idea what the reach was for some of this, what we took. Polarizing filters for all lenses because we're on the water and you really want that. We had 2 cotton carriers. That's a trademark, but that's what Meg's wearing. You see on her chest, the camera is held there. It's a hands-free thing. It's just a quarter turn. You could put your camera in and lock it, and then your hands are free. And it's an easy way to carry cameras in an active environment, which we were in. Particularly when getting out of Zodiacs and so on, you want 2 hands free. We had 3 32 gigabyte memory cards. I unloaded those each day onto the laptop. I carried an external SSD, 1 terabyte, and backed them up off the laptop every day. The last thing you want to do is have a problem that something failed when you're on an expensive trip, or even a non-expensive trip. If it's a once in a lifetime thing, you don't want to lose those pictures. And go ahead. Correct. No. I skipped that. You're right. So because they're in a very wet environment, Olympus makes a waterproof camera that we actually have used for underwater snorkeling and things like that. And we took that just in case we were in a day where we wouldn't want to, even though these Olympus cameras are quite weatherproof, I wouldn't want to take them out in a gale. Okay. And I certainly wouldn't want to try and change a lens or anything. So, and the last thing was we had 2 iPhones because we're not always carrying our cameras and you never know what pops up at times. And we use them occasionally. All right. So that was our gear. So what I'm going to do now is take you through day by day what we did, give you a little idea of what was there. We started off in Aberdeen, typical Scottish, relatively, it's the 3rd largest city in Scotland. And it's a fishing town, has a big fishing history. Now it's more oil and gas, offshore platforms and so on. We came in a couple of days, actually a day before the day we needed to be there. We've learned that, you know, these days traveling is an adventure, just getting there. And the last thing you want to do is to miss the point where the ship's leaving and you're not there. So we usually come in a day or 2 early, allows you to see the sights, allows you to get used to the time change and so on. So that's what we did. So our first day out, we went to Orkney, which is a archipelago of small islands, and we docked at mainland, which is the main island in Orkney. If you look on the map, you'll see our route shown, and we docked at Kirkwall, which is the capital of the Orkneys, okay, capital city. And we then bussed from there to 2 sites, and then we could walk almost to the 3rd site. So the first site was Skara Brae, which is a Neolithic settlement and now a World Heritage Site. It was occupied around 2500 to 3000 BC. So it's 4,000 years old. And there's 9 surviving houses built of stone slabs sunk into the earth, which we'll go through and show you. But that was one. Nearby, not too far away, we then went over to the Ring of Brodgar, which is a Neolithic henge, which I learned. I didn't know what a henge was. It's a dugout circle with a little bit of a mound on either the inside or the outside. Doesn't always have stones in the middle, but this does. And so there's a stone ring, and it's actually a circle. Many of these stone circles are not circular. They're a little oblong or whatever. For whatever reason, this one is really perfectly circular, 100 meters in diameter. And it was erected roughly in the same time. And the last place we went was near the ship to St. Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall. Excuse me, founded around 1137. And it's the northernmost complete cathedral. Oh, good, Tom. In Scotland, and it's built of local red sandstone. So Neolithic is the last part of the Stone Age, just before the Bronze Age. And I spilled some water here, so that's what I'm struggling with at the moment. Yeah, I'm used to that now. Okay. I'll get you. Whoops, I'm going backwards. Okay. So this is Skara Brae looking down from the top, and it was home 4,000 years ago. And it's built into the earth, and there's, I think, 9 or 10 houses that they've been able to identify. It was first uncovered by a storm in 1850. It's right near the water's edge, which you'll see. And the storm blew off some of the surrounding material, washed it away. And the Earl at the time on his land found this and began to protect it. And now it's a protected site. So there's 9 surviving houses. You'll see there's actually furniture. You know, it's hard to believe when you look at this. It's been there for 4,000 years. So there's humans that live there, approximately 50 people. So this is the site, and this is the home 4,000 years ago. You see that wall on the left side that's recently put there to help preserve and prevent erosion of the site, which is just beyond that. And this is what you see. It's built, they were built into the earth. This is all flagstone is kind of the stone in that area. Relatively easy to work with, and these are certainly Stone Age people. They know how to work stone. And they built it into the ground. I mean, this is it can be very cold, not freezing, but very cold, wet, and extremely windy. If you notice, you don't see any trees. There are very few trees in Orkney. They just can't stand the wind. So looking at these slabs, you just stand there and try and envision what this was like to live there years ago. That they were roofed over, they feel. Roofing was typically made by whale ribs or driftwood that they found, because there are not many trees. And then that was covered by skins and maybe by sod, but that was then the roof. So this was all under roof. This is one of the homes that gives you a good idea. There's 2 sleeping boxes on either side. There's a hearth in the middle, that square in the middle. And then in the back there is what they call the dresser. Whether it was really a dresser or not, no, but it was used they found some artifacts there. The things that were prized were kept there. And actually over in the corner, there's a little box, and there was actually a rudimentary sewer system. There was a box and there was a channel leaving out where you could wash out the box and it would go out to the sea. So just thinking this is 4,000 years old. Excuse me. We then moved on to the Ring of Brodgert, which is a lovely site. And we were there in the middle of the summer. So the heather was out. It was a beautiful area. Again, very remote. No trees. And to think those things have been there 4,000 years, standing. They're about 10 feet tall, just to give you an idea. Yeah. They haven't really figured out a lot about them. Now, they haven't seen any astronomical alignment of any sort. They've had great difficulty dating them actually accurately. They know roughly that they must have been on time. There are other stone circles around. This one is the more interesting one. We then went on into Kirkwall and got to visit the St. Magnus Cathedral. Very interesting cathedral. It's all the native sandstone from around Orkney. And so you see this red church, red and yellow. Again, 900 years old and still being used today. You go inside, they had this really bright violet lighting that was a little difficult to take pictures. I kind of lightened it up on the left side just so you could see a little bit of the architecture inside. It's used, I don't know whether I could say it's more, I'm sure there's religious uses, but they also use it more as a community center, as a community meeting place, and so on. It was very interesting. It's amazing to see the architecture and how it was built. So that was Orkney. Then we moved the next day, day 3, we moved up to Fair Isle, which you can see on the map, not too far away. It's a small island. It's only about 3 miles long by 1.5 miles wide. It's got about 70 people that live there. It's a very remote settlement. It's a hot spot for birding and a hot spot for ornithologists. There's the Fair Isle Bird Observatory, which is internationally renowned and has been doing research for over 50 years on the breeding colonies and the birds. It's a major stop for migration, for birds migrating north and south. So here's typically how we get ashore. That's the ship off there. If you see the little Zodiac there coming in with blueberries in it, the blueberry jackets, those are our people, and there's some people on shore. We then walked out of there. You can see the cliffs. The cliffs were all around. This is typically what the birding or what the area looked like. I walked up along well, also sheep are everywhere. So when you walk up these places, you got to watch where you're walking a bit. But along the edge are puffins all along there. So I headed up there. Meg headed across the island over to see what the village was like. I'll show you that in a minute. But we could sit about 15 feet away from the puffin colony, and I spent 2 hours just sitting there. It was a blast. They were coming and going. They could care less what we were doing. And it was a beautiful place. So dinner coming home, sand eels, which are actually small fish. That's a favorite food of the puffins. The other thing you can do is there's a pretty good wind blowing, as it always seems to be there. And if you got upwind of their burrows, so you're looking downwind, you could get them coming in. And they're not great flyers. They're kind of called flying potatoes. I mean, that gives you an idea what they look like when they're flying. Their wings are really going fast, and they got this big, heavy body. But you can get some interesting shots coming in. Well, many of them are tagged because the research center is there, and they do a lot of tagging and do a lot of work with the birds. Many of them are, and then you can get them coming in. I just love that picture, but it was just fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And then Meg was headed out. That's the research center there on the right of the picture. Meg was walking the road up to the other side of the island. As I said, it's about a mile and a half wide by 3 long, but the cliffs are all along. And you can walk on your way over. Sheep roam free. Okay. And just to give you an idea, 70 people on the island, that's the hospital. Okay. That's the infirmary. You can be pretty independent when you're out there living there. So just to give you an idea. And again, I'd love to show you more pictures, but got to continue to move. Thank you, Margaret. So we moved on, then we spent overnight and a little bit into the next day to cruise up to the Faroe Islands, and our first stop was at Vegar, which is on Suðuroy, which is the southernmost island of the Faroe Islands. It's an autonomous territory of Denmark. And Suðuroy had a population, Vegar had a population of about 4,500, just to give you an idea of the whole island. So as they're coming in, this is Vegar. I mean, they're not big towns, and they're sitting at the end of a long bay, maybe not quite a fjord, but an interesting bay, protected area. You can see the wind still blowing pretty good. And they were all, the town turned out for the ship to come in, and it was really interesting. One of the first things they did was they met us as we got off the ship, and there were, 30 or 40 townsfolk. And they said I had a speaker set in the middle there, and the person over there on the left that was talking. And we had the world's, biggest line dance I've ever been in, which is a traditional dance of theirs. It's basically 2 steps to the left, 1 to the right. And everybody's doing it. And they're singing one of their traditional songs. And it was just, it was a neat way to get introduced to the town. And we then walked the town the rest of the day and went into the church. It's very interesting. The other thing is we stopped as we were walking along the waterfront. This was a typical ship fishing boat that was built by an old gentleman that we were talking to for about a half an hour. This is what he said he would take to go out about 10 miles out into the ocean and fish and bring back the catch. It has room for four oarlocks. We learned later it also has room for a pole for a sail if you needed it. And I could kick myself because he was a really interesting, I didn't take a picture of him. And, I get kind of focused on everything else and I forget people. Okay. And that's what I should kick myself about. But it was interesting. But that gives you an idea. It's a very seafaring culture. We then moved up to the main island of Streymoy and to Tórshavn, which is the center, the capital of the Faroe Islands. You know, we're talking again, 21,000 people in the capital, you know, maybe 24,000 total on the island. I mean, it's not a lot of people. Sheep, fish, and tourism are now the main economy. You know, 30, 50 years ago, it was kind of the reverse. It was fish, sheep, and tourism. Okay. But now, I'm saying it backwards. Tourism is one of the major things right now. As sheep and fish kind of fade away a little bit. They're still there, but not like they were. And here you begin to see the sod on the house, on the roofs. And we asked, how come? You know, well, it's cheap and it sits there in the wind and doesn't move. So it's a fairly, you see it a fair amount. You probably saw it more 100 years ago than you do now, but you still see it. So let me go back. Can I go back? Yeah, there we go. So we went from Tórshavn, we went by bus over to Eysturoy and to a sheep farm. And the reason we could make that trip was because many of these northern islands are now all connected by undersea tunnels. And our guide was talking, who was an older gentleman who had actually been part of the council that decided whether they should build the tunnels or not, like 10 years ago. And it was a big debate. There were the people that didn't want that because the ferries were good enough and they didn't want people coming over. And then there were people that said, yeah, we need to have this to, you know, build our economy and so on. So most of the northern islands are now all connected by sea tunnels. So it was interesting going from Streymoy over to Eysturoy by bus across that water there. So this is, again, no trees. You know, beautiful area, but no trees. This is now over on Eysturoy. It gives you an idea of what the geography is like. It's really quite pretty. And we didn't have a lot of sunshine. We had some bright days, but we had some very wet days also. We were headed over to a sheep farm, and this is, I guess you would call it the sheep shed. This is where the sheep can come in when the weather's bad. Typically, they use it a lot in the wintertime because when the winter storms blow, it's not snow necessarily, but they get down close to freezing. And it's the wet and the high winds that can kill animals. And they'll find them down in ravines and things like that because they're trying to get out of the weather. So here they can get into the sheep shed. One of the owners was giving us a description of how they do their farming, their sheep farming. One of the main things we learned was they don't use the wool anymore. It's not economically feasible for them. It doesn't pay. They now raise the sheep for meat. And that's what they raise them for. So interesting. This is then looking down from the sheep shed, and just over the edge there was a village we didn't even know was there. It was about 100 to 150 houses right along the water's edge. Very interesting place. Meg bought a nice sweater there. They do a lot of knitting up there. It's very pretty. And you can see, again, you can see a house there in the lower middle with the green roof. So it gives you an idea what it was like. It was an interesting drive. The next day, now we're on day 6, was one of our more memorable days. We went up to the northern end of Eysturoy to a very small village called Eldavik. It's only about 60 people, and they only invite in about 2 ships a year, small ships. And they prepare for weeks ahead of time, because what they do is we had personal tour of the village by many of the people that lived there in groups of 10 or 12. And again, there were about 140 of us. So there were 9, 10 groups. And then we had a sit-down lunch in the home. They had prepared a really tasty fish stew and baked bread. It was just really nice to see the whole thing. And of course, on top of that, we had a gale that was building. And it was 40 knots and heavy rain on the day. And so we had to prepare for that. The people in the village were concerned because, as you can see, this building, while it looks really nice, there was a rainbow in the morning, it was very wet. And they were worried we wouldn't be able to land, and all their preparations, you know, we wouldn't be able to go there. So there was, you know, we've quickly realized there's no taking our normal camera gear, and good thing we brought the underwater camera, so to speak, because that's what we used. Even using iPhones, you really had to protect them. It was wet, wet, wet. That's kind of like leaving the ship in the Zodiacs on that day. There were, like you see, dust tornadoes at times in windy weather. Well, there were mist tornadoes going along out on the water. It was blowing that hard. So this is where we landed. So you got full rain gear and 2 hands for the boat, meaning it was a little touchy getting in there. We had to, you know, bump up against the dock, and there was a little small landing, about 4x4, and you climbed up and worked your way up to walk into the village. Okay. What am I doing? There we go. This is the walk into the village. Then it was about a half a mile away over the little hilltop. Lovely little village. And again, it was a beautiful time of year. Things really bloom there. This is right around solstice, middle of the summer, and a lot of daylight. I mean, the sun would set around midnight and rise at 3 a.m. It was rather disorienting at times if you sometimes got up to use the restroom at 3 a.m. and the sun streaming through the window. It's lets you know you're somewhere you're not used to being. But this is the little village. You see kind of a water spot on the lens over there on the left. It was just really blowing. So then we were given a tour of fishing by the gentleman leaning against the rock there without the hood up, the white hair. He was, I mean, you see people cowering in the sheds over there, and one guy standing out. But I mean, the wind was whipping through there about 40 knots, and the wind was driving, and he didn't care. He's just there. He's telling us all about fishing and going out in this boat, and how he did things. You can see other boat sheds there up in the upper right, all built into the thing. I'll try it again. Is that better? So after we had lunch and met with the people, we then headed back, but it's just a picture to remind us more than anything else of the day. It was a bumpy ride getting back to the boat, but it was a real memorable day. It was very interesting. We then went, the next day, we worked our way around to Vestmanna at the northern end of Streymoy. It used to be a ferry terminal to get across to the smaller island of Vegar. And we had gone there in order to be able to go out along the outside cliffs and see the sea caves and birds and so on, but we really couldn't do that because the weather was just too bad. So it's an example. You'll see some of our observations at the end. If you can spend more time in certain places to allow for weather, it's worth doing. So later in the day, we headed over to what I've circled there was the island of Mykonos, which is a beautiful area. I'll show you. Again, we couldn't land, but we got to see it a little bit and got an idea of why it's such a beauty. So this is the day. It wasn't raining, but it was windy and misty and typical North Atlantic weather. But we could go up the protected fjords and up, but as we got near the outside, it was clearly a little too rough. This is interesting. These are boat sheds along the bay of the town. A lot of fishing in the past. Now many of them are being converted, you might notice, into apartments for Airbnb. So they're finding ways to survive. Yeah, right on the water. You got your waterfront little Airbnb. As we did go out there, the land's steep and you see sheep everywhere. You wonder how they stand straight on some of these things. They must have short legs on one side and long legs on the other. But and a lot of waterfalls too. It's a beautiful area. This then is Mykonos. it's just a beautiful place. I mean, big steep cliffs, even in this weather, it was interesting, beautiful area. You can see one of the little boat there on the right. Well, this wasn't so little, it was about 30, 40 feet long. Took our guide off because we were now headed up to Iceland. And our guide, she was a resident there. That was actually her family's boat, who runs a tourist day trips out to there. That shot actually was a combination of pictures taken with, I think, the 40 millimeter, which would be an 80 millimeter. Yeah, so it's stitched together, I think, about three frames. Because I couldn't switch lenses a lot there. So you'll see I did a lot of panoramic type handheld picture taking to get more panoramas. That's why it worked. Beautiful. This is I forgot the name. I didn't get the name of this waterfall, but it's one of the more picturesque ones in the area. And when you have dark and stormy weather and you get some light, sometimes it can make for some interesting black and white shots. And so you make what you can out of what you have. I kind of like that shot. So then we spent a day and a half traveling from the Faroe Islands over to the Westman Islands, or Vestmannaeyjar. I have great difficulty getting my mouth around some of these Norse names. So I'll call them the Westman Islands because that's what they mean. But it's an archipelago of about 18 islands, the biggest of which is Heimei, right, Meg? Heimei. Okay. But it's a region of high volcanic activity. And because we left a little early and couldn't spend time at Mykonos, we got there a little early. And we got to go around the island of Surtsey, which is actually a new volcanic island that appeared about 50 years ago out of the sea. And so this is Vestmannaeyjar, Iceland. It's the group of these small islands off Iceland. That's mainland Iceland in the background. And this is Surtsey. It's now a World Heritage Site, and it was declared a nature preserve shortly after it came out of the sea in 1963 and continued to 1967. Excuse me. It's mainly used to study biocolonization. In other words, it's studying how quickly volcanic new islands or dirt, etc., becomes colonized by vegetation. And nobody can land on the island but scientists that are registered there. So you can see over on the far right a little shed that some of their instruments are in, but you can see the layers of volcanic ash along the shoreline, the cliff line. It's a beautiful area, and man, again, you could spend. We circled the island in about an hour, hour and a half. I think you could spend a whole afternoon there just circling the island, looking for shots, because it's just photographically, it was just mesmerizing. Okay. And that island is losing about, I think, I don't know, it was a square kilometer or so a year, just washing into the sea, because there isn't really lava. It's mostly ash and cinder. But you can see greening up in 50 years. Some black and white shots are interesting. It's hard to get the perspective unless you put something in there that you can latch onto. So there's a seabird. And over here, those little white dots, those are seabirds resting on the cliff, making a home. So a beautiful area in its way. We then began to head up to Heimei. This was a sea stack, and it seemed as we moved in, almost anything that could hold a bird was holding a bird. Okay, if you looked at the top of that sea stack, those are all birds, and most of them are gannets, which are beautiful birds. They have about a 6-foot wingspan, just to give you an idea. They're related to boobies, and they're only found in the North Atlantic, and several other. The northern gannet is only found there in a broad area, and they dive for fish. And I was reading that they actually have like little air sacs around their head and up into their shoulders. It acts like bubble wrap because they hit the water at about 60 miles an hour. Okay, going straight down for fish. They get one of the deeper diving birds, but beautiful flying birds. So then we got to Heimaey, which means a home island. And it kind of made a name for itself in 1973 as a volcano erupted right behind the town. I mean, literally just blew up. And the whole town was evacuated by the fishing fleet that was in the harbor. And they got off the island overnight. And our guide was saying there was about 4,000 people in the village at that time, and about 2/3 came back and the rest never came back. Also, you see that swale kind of running just behind the houses in front of the cliffs. That was a volcanic a lava run that was headed for their harbor, which was a harbor that has a small neck going out to the sea, and was threatening to cut it off completely, which would have been devastating for the island. So the US Navy gave them some pumps, and they started pumping seawater on the front of the approaching lava run. And eventually they stopped it. It had never been done before, but they stopped it from closing off the harbor. So we were talking about a picture taken of a picture. They have a wonderful volcanic museum of the volcanic eruption in 1973. This is one of the pictures in the museum that I just took a picture of. So to give you an idea of what it was like. Yeah, it's a still life, right? But you know, to have a volcano going off behind your house is a little tough. They did, once the volcano simmered down, they did head back into town and dug it all out, basically, and that's kind of what it looks like today with the volcanic cone in behind the city there. It's interesting. This is at the other end of the island. It's not a big island, but it's very beautiful. This is looking at Iceland and the ice cap on Iceland, which we see in about a week's time. But pretty area. Again, the wildflowers, there's the village, and just there where you see some of the oil tanks and the cranes is the neck of the harbor. And you can see running straight in from where I took this shot was the lava field that was headed for that harbor. And it's a very interesting harbor to get into. Here we're departing, but it's kind of an S-shaped entryway and a big ship and a narrow passage with cliffs on either side. It was very interesting. So on day 11, we headed to Reykjavik, where some of the passengers departed, and we took on new passengers. Meg and I walked the town a little bit, but I'm not going to give you a tour of Reykjavik. That's for another time. Did learn a little bit of where the word Vik in the Norse and in Icelandic language means bay or inlet. So if you see Reykjavik, you begin to wonder, well, what's that from? Well, it really means Bay of Smoke, because when the settlers or the Vikings first came and looked and saw this bay, is warm water because of all the thermal activity, and it was smoking, right? A lot of mist on the water, and that became known as Bay of Smoke, Reykjavik. And then the people of the bay are Vikings. So that's where the word came from. So the next day we anchored up to the Snæfellsnes Peninsula and went ashore. It's a volcanically active area. And I'm not going to try to get the Snæfellsnes Jökull volcano in National Park. And you can see it in the red box there on the chart. Very pretty area. That's the glacier up at the top of the volcano in the background. It's just beautiful. Here it's interesting comparison. You can see the waterfall on the right and crystallized lava on the left. It also looks like a fall. So there's a still life, right? But it's a beautiful area, very pretty. The lava fields run all through the area of the peninsula, and they're pretty new, and the lava is fairly sharp. You also see trees planted all around. We learned that Iceland had a lot of trees around the 10th century, in the 11th century. And then how did our guide put it? And then they accidentally cut them all down. Accidentally, yes. Well, so they're gone, and then the sheep were introduced, and that kind of kept everything from getting there. You'll see a fair amount these days of they're trying to replant the island. And there are some areas that have some trees. The other thing is, in some of these fields that have been there for a little while, there is this moss that grows in among them, among the wildflowers. The moss is about 5 inches thick. And while the rock is pretty sharp, if you lay on the moss, it was pretty comfortable. Yeah, so it's just interesting. A little bit of the landscape of the area. You'll see some odd shaped things sticking up at times. These are lava tubes that kind of formed going up. Either the lava was over a wet area and drove the steam up, and then they formed, and then the rest of the lava fell away. But the peninsula is very interesting. You know, get down so that you get both foreground, midground, background, so you can get some beautiful shots of the area. If you see at the base of the waterfall, that's a ranch house. Just again, it's tough to get perspective in some of these places, but it's a beautiful area. This is a black church that's still being used, built in the middle of the 19th century. The reason it's black was because they used pitch to waterproof it. That's what they had, and they still use it today. That's what we were doing through the morning on a bus tour. In the afternoon, we walked along the cliffs. And again, like many places where you find a cliff, wherever you can find a niche, there's going to be a bird. And you can see them there on the right. This was an area for mostly kittiwakes, which is another seabird of the area. Pretty flyer, pretty bird. And if you look closely, man, they all have their little chicks there. And it's a happening place. We then moved up to West Fjords, which is a beautiful area of Iceland, and went to Dynjandifoss. And Dynjandi means thunderous and is a jewel of the West Fjords. It's a huge waterfall with 7 additional small waterfalls. Foss means waterfall. It's been a protected area since 1981. And I'm not going to attempt the fjord, but the fjord of which Dynjandi is at the head of is claimed to be full of monsters. There's over 180 recorded sightings, but they must be camera shot because we just couldn't see them. So it's a beautiful area. That's the Dynjandifoss. And just to give you an idea, again, you got some of the blueberries hiking up there. We went there very early in the morning. We got there about 7 a.m., landing at 7 a.m. because around 10, 11 o'clock, some of the buses from the big cruise ships arrived, and we wouldn't have it to ourselves anymore. But it was a beautiful morning, and I mean, you could spend days there. It's just a beautiful place. You see a person way up there at the base of the waterfall on the right. Yeah, just give you an idea. Spectacular place. The other thing you want to do at times is to turn around and look behind you. And when you do that, you get some also very pretty areas. Wildflowers were all out, the streams were running down, and the fjord was in the background. It's a beautiful morning. I sat there, Meg hiked up further. I sat and played around with shutter speeds and things like that to get the waterfall and the wildflowers all around. It was, could have spent a day or more there. Then we headed back to the ship. This is an example of a wet landing and a wet getting off. So that's why you have rubber boots at times. But the whole fjord was just a beautiful place. We then moved around to the northern part of Iceland to Grimsey, which is right on the Arctic Circle. So it'll give you an idea how far north it is. Another storm was blowing, so we were trying to get to Grimsby and before the storm built up too much, but it turns out it was just way too rough to try a landing. As you can imagine, if you're in a Zodiac, which is 10 feet long, and you're in waves that are 4 feet high, it can be exciting trying to land on a beach or at some place that's landing. And that's when, or what we found was more exciting was trying to get back on board the ship. Okay, when you're trying to get onto a platform that's, the ship isn't moving much, but the waves are going up and down 5 feet. It can be fun. So that's why they didn't attempt that. Interesting thing about the Arctic Circle, which I didn't realize, that the circle is moving north about 50 feet a year. And by 2050, it will be north of the island. And the reason is because the Earth actually has a wobble on its axis. It kind of like you see a gyroscope spinning and it kind of wobbles around. Well, that's what's happening. And in this case, so it's only got a cycle of about 41,000 years. So, you know, if you wait a little while, it'll come back. But right now, they actually had a round boulder in a field that was where the circle actually passed through. And every year they roll the boulder further north about 40 or 50 feet. So, but we were in high seas till we got around to the leeward side of the island. And again, cliffs. And we got off on the Zodiacs. We're in the lee of the storm here. And we spent the morning cruising the cliffs, and there were tens of thousands of birds. Anywhere where there was a place you could squat and put an egg. And by the way, these eggs, if you've ever noticed, are kind of conical in shape. In other words, they're not perfectly round. They have a shorter end and a fatter end. And the reason is because if you roll them, they're going to roll in a circle and they won't roll off the cliff. So Mother Nature has selected this out for these birds. There's two broad types of birds here. It was the common murre and the razorbill, and they were all over. And it was fun zodiacking along the cliffs. There were big flocks of birds in the water. We then moved down in the fjord to get out of the storm a little bit to a small island called Hrissi. And Meg and I stayed on board, as many of the passengers went aboard to walk the island. But we kind of sat on the back of the ship and enjoyed the fjord that was around us. It's a beautiful place. They do have a ferry service that's running on a regular schedule off the island back down to the head of the fjord. But very pretty. So we moved the next day. We're on day 15 now. We went down to Akureyri, which is really a stopping point for the Godafoss waterfall, which is waterfall of the gods, and of the lava fields for Dimmaborgir, okay, which means dark castles. And it's an area of unusual lava formations from thousands of years ago, to where the lava went over a marshy area and created big steam columns that came up and formed the lava tubes basically around these columns. And then the rest of the lava receded or washed or was eroded away. In the Icelandic lore, this is a place where Satan landed when he was cast out of heaven, just to give you an idea of what it might be like. This is the waterfall, the Godafoss. Picturesque area. You could walk up, spend it about a half a mile away. Just a lovely area. Again, spend a day there if you had the time. Yes, yeah, the kind of turquoise water, milky turquoise. This is on the way to the dark castles, and you can see the volcanic cones all around. These were the castles. Dimmuborgir. We walked it. We didn't. I don't know. It just wasn't our day. We didn't feel like there was a lot of pictures there. It was an interesting place to see once, and you can see why it was named such. It's a rugged place. Day 16, we moved on to Husavik, which is an old fishing port. was first settled in the late 800s. And there was one house there that was occupied during the summer, and then they went back to Sweden or Norway for the winter. But Husavik means bay again, Vik, right? So you know that's bay. Husavik means bay of houses, because that's where there were some houses for a long time. It's not a center for whale watching, so we were going out. There was a wooden church, what I won't won't try and pronounce, but you see it right here, built in 1907, and it's still there today, kept in good shape. And it was a lovely little village, certainly a center for whale watching. There were a lot of boats that were going out. Here we're headed out on one of the boats, and we saw some whales. It was good to make that acquaintance again. We've seen whales elsewhere, but it's always interesting to watch the humpbacks. The other thing to watch was the scenery was just pretty amazing. That's another whale watching boat, similar to the one we were on. But the other side of the bay was just a beautiful area, and then you get some sun dappling on the hills. And it was just that house is not occupied anymore. It was occupied at one time. Pretty interesting place.
Golden Circle, or are they just accessible from the water?
Well, it's hard for me to tell because we didn't pay attention to where the highways ran, right? But there is it's a major town, and there were, I mean, very major town, meaning 4,000 people probably, and I'm sure it had the highway either near it or into it. Yeah. Okay. We then moved around from Husavik around and came into Seyðisfjörður. And primarily it's just to come in and be able to go out to the Skalanes Nature Center, which is out at the end of the fjord, where the town is at the head of the fjord. And that's where we met a lot of Arctic terns. Now, Arctic terns are pretty amazing birds. They have the longest migration of any bird. They go from their breeding area in the Arctic to summer in the Antarctic. 20-some thousand miles one way, and then back again. And they're amazing little birds. You just, and it was a beautiful setting. We walked out along, first of all, we were taking a 4-wheel drive bus, believe it or not, to get out on this 2-lane rutted road, fording streams in the bus and everything else. It was pretty interesting, but it was a beautiful area out there. Now, this was not on the ring road. I mean, this part, you had to get out there. And sheep are there. And the birders were really excited because we saw a black-tailed godwit, which is only in Northern Europe. Was an interesting little bird, and you can see it's banded. But it was fun. One of our guides was a real birder, and he got extremely excited in the bus when he saw one off the side of the road. The lupins were all out. Pretty area. And as we walked out from the nature center up to the cliffs, where there's cliffs, there's birds, and we saw the puffins again. Yeah. They were there, didn't seem to be too bothered by us. And if that's the road leading out to the area, and if you can see around his head, there looked like a couple bees buzzing around. Those are Arctic terns. They don't like you walking through the area where they're nesting. And if you don't have your hand up or something up, you're going to get a bloodied hole in your head because they will spear you. Okay. They're very aggressive. You had a hat on. Yep. But they're also fun to photograph because they're flying around, and they're great flyers, and beautiful little birds. We then moved on day 18 now into Djúpivogur, which nothing special about it other than it was a place where we could get a bus to get down to the ice cap and the glacier coming off the ice cap. because the southern part of Iceland, the southern coast of Iceland is rather shallow. And there's really no deep water ports of any, or even shallow water ports to come into. You'll see there's, in a couple of pictures, there's a lot of scree coming down from the mountains for all the freezing and thawing, breaks up the lava, softer lava rocks, and it cascades down and fills in a lot of the coast. We also learned, so we got the bus and we're headed over to the glacier coming off the ice cap, one of many. And we also made a stop at Diamond Beach, which we'll show you a bit here. But we also learned that sheep have the right of way in Iceland, in many of the islands that we went to. If you hit a sheep, you owe the farmer. And at 5,000 a head, it could be a. We also learned that sheep think they know the right of way, because here we are in a big bus, and I can't get myself going here. Where is my? Did you see it? I don't know what happened. So I'll use my. There we go. Okay, so the sheep seem to know they have the right of way because we're in a full-size bus and we're barreling down the road, and this ram is just standing there and looking at us. And we came to a halt. We sat there for 3 or 4 minutes till he decided to leave the road. I think it's just throwing his weight around a little bit, you know, but it was rather amusing. So this is the highway leading along the southern coast. It's a pretty area. And then we begin to see the ice cap and the glaciers coming off the ice cap. I like that picture. So this is at the other end of this river is Diamond Beach, and this is outflow from the glacier, from the ice cap, and you get a lot of the blue ice coming down. And as you can see, we really had kind of an overcast day. We didn't have hardly any sun. And so when we got down to the beach, where if you have a morning, you know, sunrise, or you have great sun, it's a great contrast between the very dark beach and the ice. And it was interesting. So you make do for the best you can, right? So we took some shots, spent some time there trying to get something that was interesting. We had some glacier ice on the left and the waves coming in. And I kind of like this one. You can slow it down and amp up the contrast a little bit, get some interesting pictures. So not typically the thing you see there at Diamond Beach, but it was kind of fun. We then headed over to the glacier and went out in Zodiacs to get up close with the glacier face. And it was again, you could just take your time going around with the blue ice and the environment itself. It was pretty interesting. If you see in the lower left, you'll see a Zodiac, a little flock of birds there going across the water at the bottom, trying to give you an idea of the scale of the place. So Iceland has this ice cap, and there are a number of glaciers coming off the ice cap. This is one that has some water, you know, that's accessible relatively easily. This is why the southern part of the island doesn't have any deep water areas off the coast, is because a lot of the scree comes down off the mountains, and to the point that many of the roads have walls built up at the base to keep it from overrunning the road. Still, you know, relatively active geological area from that standpoint. So nearing the end, we came around then back to Heme, where we had been, you know, a week before. It was a gloomy day, and so Meg and I kind of began to pack up because that was the next day we were headed off the boat. But a beautiful area again, just to spend some time, even though it was rainy and foggy. It was an interesting place to be. So some observations from our trip. If you can allow time, okay, if you pick some areas, do allow more time if you can, primarily because the weather is going to change. And you can always get some shots during the weather, whatever the weather is, as we did, but you can miss some things if you ever have a nice day or have a different weather day. So if you can allow some time, do. We'd never been to these places before, either of us. Other than we'd been to Orkney a little bit, but we hadn't been to Skara Brae. So it was interesting. Make sure you're comfortable up there in the North Atlantic, because the worst thing is that you're not comfortable because you won't be interested in taking photographs. Okay, so stay warm, dry, and comfortable. It's wild, it's rugged. Be prepared for that to move around. Long daylight hours. We were there at the end of June and the early part of July. As I said, sun would set around midnight, 11:30, 12 o'clock. It would rise around 3:30, and never really got dark. And of course, the converse of that is if you go this time of year, you're not going to get much light. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The bird life was spectacular. Of course, they were all there in the breeding season, but it was very interesting. The culture was the people were very independent. They made do with whatever they were given, and many of them. I mean, I remember the bus driver we had in Hemahi. He was telling us he had about 4 or 5 jobs, and this was one of them. Okay, I mean, they will go and make do with whatever they can find to make relatively small population work. It was very interesting. Very welcoming, independent people, the Norse and Viking heritage, and tourism is becoming a major part of their economy. You know, fishing and sheep kind of going down a little or becoming more centralized into some of the bigger operations, but tourism is picking up to a relatively high degree. Iceland is quite expensive. Just be prepared for that. But I'll tell you, the Faroes were equally beautiful, we felt, and not so expensive. So something to consider. So we really felt privileged to be able to journey north through these Atlantic Isles. It was a relatively unique experience to go by boat and to be able to see and experience the weather and what these people live with, you know, year round. And certainly it was fun to share it all with you. So, questions? No questions? That's good.
What are the tides like there?
Yeah, so the question is, what are the tides like there? I mean, Meg and I are used to tides that at times can be, like we sail the North Pacific Northwest a lot there. The tides can be anywhere from 8 to 15, 16 feet. The tides are not that big there. I was a little surprised. They were 3, 4, 5 feet maybe. I mean, so you had to be aware of them, but not like up in Alaska or the Pacific Northwest, which. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the ones that were being reconverted to Airbnbs, they're right on the water. You know, so not a 10 or 15 foot tide like some places can have. This is more, yeah, more of an the question was, were there a lot of other photographers on this trip? And this is billed more as an expedition cruise, which means a lot of hiking and getting on and off the boat and so on. There were certainly a number of photographers. We were probably among the more interested photographers, of which maybe of the 140 people, there were maybe 20 or 30, you know, so it wasn't like there were 100 people that were, you know, trying to get all in the same place at once. There were people that really loved to hike, and we were typically separated. They would give 3 hikes. There was the energetic, you know, you're only going to hike, you're not taking pictures or stopping for anything. There was the medium one, which was still relatively fast paced, and we might wait for you, but we might not. And then there was what we usually went on, which was go where you want to go. We'll generally go together, but if you want to take pictures and you want to be around, that was okay. So that's kind of it. Yeah. Right. So the question was, what happens the rest of the day on the ship, basically? Was there educational things or so on? And that's where, if you go on an expedition cruise, as opposed to a deluxe cruise or whatever the opposite would be, you want to pay attention and make sure you have a good expedition team. thought you turned that off. You want to look at the expedition team. We had a 40-person expedition team, and there were PhDs in geology, there were bird experts, we had several native speakers from the islands that lived and were born and lived there. And they would give us, lectures on the lore. We had one guy that he could tell you all the tales from the Norse heritage. And there was a big room could hold all of us, where there was always something going in terms of a lecture of some sort. And then there was a CCTV, a closed circuit TV back to your cabin. So you didn't always have to be there. You could stay in your cabin and still watch the lectures. So like the day in particular, or the day and a half where we were just at sea sailing over to Iceland, there was something going on all the time in terms of education primarily. Yeah. Meg is saying there were craft workshops at times. They had a special where you could sign up beforehand for, was it knitting and needlework basically, and they had a small group that signed up, and they went off by themselves in the islands to some real hotbeds of craft. So, any other questions? Anything online? Not well. They probably sourced from the local area to a degree, but most of it was just served on board. There was they have a big culinary staff. As you can imagine, they have sit down 100 people to dinner at night. But I wouldn't say that they were really focused on the local foods. Yes.
Tom, we get a feel of places like the islands of Scotland and the villages of Iceland. In retrospect, do you think it was done to get that feel, that sense well on a boat as opposed to land travel? Like, would you go back on the boat again to Iceland, or would you say you felt like maybe you missed something, you want to do it by land?
I guess we would look into that. I'm not educated enough to know what was on land that we would have missed. I would have to look into that. I know there was some
Place from the boat.
From what we enjoy being on the water, and to be able to be on the water and to experience the North Atlantic and to see how these people lived was really kind of special. We felt we enjoy that. I imagine if you go, I don't know, Iceland, you can go around the ring road, or you can do various things. That's not our thing, so to speak. So I don't know. We've gone to the Outer Hebrides and the islands off Scotland, and there you can get there by ferry, but you then either have to bike or rent a car to go along. And we've gone there with a smaller ship, like 15 people, and that was well worth it to see those islands, the Outer Hebrides and the islands off Scotland there by ship. That's a beautiful way to see them. I don't know whether I answered your question, but yeah.
Yes, most of the cities will be on for the
For Iceland.
villages and
Yeah.
towns.
Yeah. Is there a question? What does it say? It was there. Yeah. The question said for local foods, were there local cheeses? Question mark. Also, what side of the road did they drive on in the various locations? Well, if you didn't run into sheep, they generally drive on the right side of the road, like normal people do. Cheeses, we didn't really have much time to go look in local markets, so I couldn't really answer that question. When we were in, go ahead. Meg was saying many of the quote villages or the towns that we visited were really quite small, and they didn't really have markets, so to speak, that brought in things from the outside, because the market, the people just weren't there. I mean, I'm sure they shared, and they sourced locally, but they didn't really offer it. We didn't get to see many food stores or markets or anything like that. Okay. Thank you all.
So if there's any, did you share us?
Oh, yeah, yeah.